Welcome to a celebration of life for Coach Paul Valenti. And a celebration it is going to be today. We've got a lineup of speakers to reflect on not only the coaching aspects of his life, but the personal and the friendships as well. Certainly we have discussions and nice talks from family members as well. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, would you please rise as we present the colors, and if you would please remain standing until the colors are retired, and Miss Julie Williams will sing the national anthem for us. Thank you.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed, ere by the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Please be seated, and thank you very much. Thank you, Naval ROTC, as well. We'll start the program with an invocation, and it's by Bishop Kenneth Steiner, who's an old friend of the family, used to be here in Corvallis, now in Portland. Bishop Steiner, would you join me on the stage?
Please remain seated. Not that it's going to be that long. I'm very happy and honored to be here and especially because of the Valenti family, Fran and Vicki and Joanne, and of course Paul. And in behalf of St. Mary's Parish, where I was pastor for 14 years, and in behalf of the Archdiocese of Portland, where I've been the auxiliary bishop for the past 37 years, I am happy to be here and extend my own personal sympathy and promise of prayers to the wonderful family of Paul Valenti and to his countless admirers and friends. Oregon State and the state of Oregon has lost a man of deep faith and love, an ambassador of friendship, faith, and family. And St. Mary's Parish and the Catholic Church also have lost a man of joy and hope who has taken all of us into the heart of our God. This afternoon you're going to hear some wonderful eulogies, words of prayer, praise, tributes and memories, and so I'm not going to compete with all of those wonderful eulogists, but recently I was named honorary chaplain of the giant killers. And so today I bring special greetings from Bill, Earthquake Enyart, and the giant killers, and especially to Jeff Lewis, who is representing them this afternoon. I was asked to give the opening prayer, but not as much time as our eulogists, so even though I'm a bishop, I cannot canonize Paul. I'll leave that to his wonderful wife, Fran, and family and friends. We have come into this hallowed place, Gill Coliseum, Ralph Miller Court, Valenti Valley, to celebrate, to remember, to thank God for his presence among us, and so we pray. Loving Father, giver of all good gifts, we thank you for the precious gift of life, which you have given to Paul Valenti 94 years ago, and the gift of life and love that he has passed on to his family and friends. And we pray that we may respect the life and dignity of each and every person whom you created in your own image and likeness, as we celebrate with joy and pride the long and fruitful life of Paul Valenti. Father of love, we gather to remember and celebrate the priceless gift of eternal life, which you have given to Paul, spiritual gifts, gifts of faith, of hope, and of love, the gifts of love and friendship, which he shared with so many, his family and friends, and even strangers, and the gift of joy, of humor, of peace of mind and heart, of true and lasting happiness. Father in heaven, we gather to remember, to celebrate, and to pray in thanksgiving for Paul's many accomplishments, achievements, successes, and even failures, victories and losses, for they were all part of his formation as a player, a teacher, a coach, a husband of nearly 70 years, a father and grandfather, a neighbor, a parishioner, a friend of Jesus, our friend. God, we thank you for our relationship with you, our Creator and Savior, and through you for our relationship with each and every person. For in meeting and loving others, we come to know and love and serve you. We thank you for all you have given to Paul Valenti, but also for all that you have given each one of us through his life and example. Paul is the person we meet on the journey of life. He is the person who challenges us in the stadium and into the stadium of life, on the court or off the court, on our pilgrimage of faith or outside the church, on the golf course or in the hazards of life. He is a person winning the game of life, the person achieving the victory of salvation, reaching the goal of eternal life. Someone once said, the most important game you will ever play is the last one, if you win. Paul Valenti goes out a winner. Our ambassador in life invites us to follow him as he has won his most important victory, eternal life and union with God, with his family and friends forever. Paul may have left his home in California, his heart in San Francisco, as you'll hear later, but he brought his heart, his home, to us in Corvallis, the heart of the valley, now Valenti Valley. Eternal rest granted to him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the love and mercy of God, rest in peace.
One of the most significant recruiting battles the Beavers have ever won against the Ducks was in 1938, when Bay Area native Paul Valenti decided not to get off of the train in Eugene and continue on to Corvallis. Valenti went on to lead an undefeated freshman team in scoring before lettering 3 years on the varsity squad for legendary coach Slats Gill. Hitting a half-court shot against Manhattan in Madison Square Garden in 1941 and helping OSU win the 1940 and 1942 Northern Division championships were some of the many highlights of his playing career. Valenti was part of what we know as the greatest generation. And after hearing the news of the Pearl Harbor attack while sitting with his fraternity brothers in Corvallis, Paul joined the U.S. Navy and proudly served his country during World War II. Valenti met his wife, Francine, at a Christmas party in San Francisco when he was on leave in the Navy, and they married in 1946. The same year, Valenti made good on a promise to Gill to return to Corvallis and finish school, and also help coach the baseball and basketball teams. Paul spent the next 18 years as an assistant basketball coach at OSU under his mentor, Slats Gill. And one of the most memorable years of that partnership was 1949, when the Beavers made the Final Four and then opened up Gill Coliseum, considered one of the finest basketball arenas in the nation, later that December. The two would lead another group of young men to the Final Four in 1963. Valenti was promoted to head coach for the 1964-65 season and went on to sign the Beavers' first African-American scholarship player, Charlie White, in 1965. What followed was one of the best seasons in Oregon State basketball history. The Beavers won the conference championship in 1966, the only time in an 18-year span that UCLA did not win a conference title, and OSU advanced to the West Regional Finals. White earned All-American honors, and Valenti was named West Coast Coach of the Year. Valenti retired from coaching prior to the 1970-71 season and continued on with the athletic department in a number of roles. He was even the head tennis coach. During his 72 years in Corvallis, as a player, coach and administrator, Valenti helped bridge the school's past and present. In the latter half of his service to Oregon State, he was inducted into the Oregon State and State of Oregon Sports Halls of Fame and the Pac-12 Hall of Honor. It is with heavy hearts that Oregon State University and all of Beaver Nation offer condolences to his wife, Fran, of 68 years, and their two daughters, Joanne and Victoria. The Valenti legacy will live on.
Thank you, and thank you, Bishop Steiner, as well, for the invocation. We get into some fun stuff now, folks, and notwithstanding the traffic jam on I-5, one more time, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming out today. We've got a number of speakers here today. It's fun to look around the crowd and see a lot of tall people. I just barely made 5'11" before my compression stage, so it's fun to see everyone out here. And we're going to start the program today with one of the taller folks out here. He played for Paul. He's well known. As a matter of fact, you can see his picture up here, number 21. He was drafted by the Boston Celtics after playing for Oregon State and Paul Valenti. He played for a number of pro teams, and I'm sure he's got some great insights on Paul as a coach. Would you welcome Mel Counts, please?
My heart and prayers go out to you, Fran, your daughters, Joanne and Vicky, your granddaughter, Gina, as well as all your extended family. Some of the best years of my life was attending Oregon State from 1960 to 64, playing basketball and enjoying the total college experience. Paul was very instrumental in improving my basketball skills as well as making me a better person. He was always extremely supportive. Paul was one of very few people in my life that had a tremendous impact on the way I turned out. We all know superstars in sports. Paul was a superstar at Oregon State for 70-plus years. When you refer to Beaver Nation, you're talking about the captain, the MVP at Oregon State, Paul Valenti. Words that best describe Paul are loyalty, not only loyalty to his friends, but tremendous loyalty to this university. He was the best. He was competitive, kind, giving, strong character, courageous, great smile, sense of humor, loving husband, father, grandfather, friend to all, and finally his strong faith in God. What a great mentor, what a great role model he was for all the people he met and knew. Paul touched many hearts and had a positive influence on hundreds of people. Paul told me many times when I played at Oregon State and after the history and winning tradition of the basketball program. He would say Ed Lewis and Red Rocha, Cliff Crandall, Jim Anderson, Lee Harmon, Dave Gamby, and many other players had helped make their program what it is, successful. What a great history lesson he passed on to me. Paul was telling me two things. Appreciate and respect the success and tradition former players had passed on to me and other players. And number two, we as present players have the responsibility to continue this great winning tradition at Oregon State. Paul had many sayings and expressions. Three of my favorite was suck it up or suck it up baby. And what he meant by that was when things are down and out, you're not doing well, you're tired, you put it together, you survive, you get the job done. And I think that all of us here can relate to that when in our lives we had to suck it up. And we thank you for that, Paul, for that advice. The other one was what a stud. What a stud that person is. And he was talking about being a great athlete, carrying the team, getting the job done, And the last one was my favorite is, what a beauty. What a beauty that person is. And you know what? That could be good or bad, depending on the person. Paul was the type of personality that could have been written about in the Reader's Digest magazine as the most unforgettable character that I ever met. It was an honor and a privilege to have been associated with Paul for many years and to have called him coach and friend. Paul, thanks for the many wonderful experiences and memories. We love you. May you rest in happiness and peace with our Lord.
Thank you very much, Mel. I can hear that voice right here today. Paul had an inimitable voice. I'd like to be able to duplicate it, but I just can't. It was the best. Our next speaker is a gentleman that came all the way from the Bay Area to be here today, former player for Paul in the Pac-10 Hall of Fame. Would you welcome Charlie White, please?
It looks like it's going to be some of the same things said from quite a few people about Paul. But first of all, I want to thank the Valenti family and the OSU family for inviting me to this celebration. I can't think of a better person that would deserve a celebration of this nature. I met Paul Valenti 50 years ago, 1964. And right away, I liked him. He liked me, and we just seemed to bond. I took him to a little Italian restaurant down in Monterey, California, since I knew most of the Italians down there, and we had a nice lunch. And he asked me if I would attend Oregon State, and I said, well, I'm not sure. He said, well, do you want to graduate? And I said, yes. He said, well, I guarantee you, if you come to Oregon State, you'll graduate. Knowing that I needed more than 2 years to matriculate since I'd come from junior college. Well, that's really the best I'd heard from any recruiter. And of course, he couldn't put it in writing because it was somewhat illegal, but but it did happen. And I did graduate, and after that, we stayed in touch for 50 years until the end. I went from coach and player to a long-term 50-year friendship. I would call him, he would call me, we would talk. He said I always called him to see if he was still around. And he always called me to see how I was doing. I remember one time he asked me how old I was, and I told him, and I told him I've been having all this pain and everything, and he said, just wait. He said, just wait. You got a while to go yet. But what I got from Paul, what I found in Paul was honesty, loyalty, dedication, and commitment. I mean, he was really committed to family, community, friends, and this university. As we all know, he spent around 72 years in service at this university. He saw a lot of things happen, and he was a good man. He helped a lot of people, me. He was a visionary, I think, a pioneer when he brought me aboard. And we bonded and formed a friendship that just lasted forever. There's one thing I'm going to say about Paul, though, too, is that when you got Paul Valenti, you got everything. You didn't get half. You didn't get a hidden agenda. You didn't get ulterior motives. You got 100%. And sometimes all wasn't all for the good. But you got everything. He never wavered. He stayed with it, and which people will tell you, he stayed with everything until there was a solution or until it was solved. And I mean, he was there all the way. And, you know, speaking of what Mel said about some of his quirks and things, he always talked about the program, giving it to the program. You know, you just take, but you got to give something to the program. He was really something. We're all going to miss him, I'm sure. And there'll be a lot of nice things said about him today, and they're all true. They're all true. He was a good guy, a great coach. And I know there's some pain, sorrow in here today, but I came across something that I think Paul would say in an occasion like this. Fill not your hearts with pain and sorrow, but remember me in every tomorrow. Remember the joy and the laughter and the smiles. I've only gone to rest a while. Although my leaving causes pain and grief, my going has eased my hurt and given me relief. So dry your eyes and remember me not as I am, but as I used to be. I remember you all and look on with a smile. Understand I've gone to rest a while. As long as I have the love from each of you, I can live my life in the hearts of all of you. Thank you. Love you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Next, we have a video by a man who has almost as much tenure at Oregon State in basketball as Paul did, and that's former player and coach Jimmy Anderson. Go ahead and roll that video.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Paul Valenti for hiring me back to Oregon State in 1964 as his assistant coach. This is a kind of a tough situation for me because we were such close friends for over 5 decades. First of all, it's a family affair because my son Jeff, his middle name is Paul. Paul was also the godchild for my daughter Jill, and son Steve, owning a restaurant in Portland for a few years, hired his granddaughter, Gina, as one of his capable workers. And our family in whole always considered Fran and Paul to be the godparents of the basketball program here at Oregon State. Paul and I, the fun that we had together was manyfold, but 2 things that we did almost every day, and that was pick up games in racquetball and pick up games in basketball. And we took on all challengers. Sometimes we would add Bill Harper to our crew, and Paul was the official. He always said since he was the oldest, he was going to be the commissioner on the floor. And I think at the end of our careers, we had won something like 5,000 games. You had to win 2 out of 3, and we always did that, and the commissioner was a big reason for it. I sometimes laugh about some of the calls that he made, but he made it clear to me that I had to stick by him on those calls. Some of them were quite ridiculous. Also, we probably seen every home baseball game that you can ever think of. We started with Ralph Coleman, then Gene Tanselli, then Coach Riley, and then Casey up until just recently. So you can tell that we are very close. Our kids went to Corvallis High School. We were able to afford helping them get through school easier here in Oregon State, and almost everyone in our family has a degree or 2 degrees from Beaverville. Paul was a special man. I think Fran put it the best when I had lunch with her a few days ago, and she said, Paul was a wonderful man. I'm going to get even with him a little bit. He's not going to expect this one. But when we were assistants under Slats Gill, and then when Paul became the head coach, he would call me on the phone. He would be down in the dressing room down here doing his daily duties. And he could work up quite a fuss down there. And he would call me when he had one going. He'd say, come on, Jimmy, come on down here. I got a new play I want to show you on the bulletin board, on the chalkboard. Or he'd say, I got a favor to ask of you. Or we need to sit down and have a little meeting. I got a couple of things on my mind. Well, about the time I got down the stairs and got halfway down the hall, I could hear him starting to laugh and giggle. And I'd go to the door and say, Paul, I'm not coming in there. No way am I coming in there. And he would laugh so hard. And I told him, one of these days I'm going to get even with you. And this is the day that I did that. So we're even Steven. But I love the man, his family, and he was ready for this. And God bless him. And I hope he helps us get to the pearly gates too.
That was terrific. Thank you very much, Jimmy. I know you're out here somewhere. I saw you earlier. Thank you. If you've seen Paul in the last few years, you'll notice that he wasn't getting around too well. He made all the baseball games that were sunshiny and made a few basketball games, and you'd see him here and there. But he came with a dear friend who helped him around, and a friend of the family's, Dominic Cusimano. Dominic, you want to come on up, please?
I'm bringing a friend. Just in case. Are you? Yeah, that's fine. Whoa. Okay, I don't know how to get close to this or what, but I want to start by reading something that a good friend of Paul's and a good friend of mine asked me to read. This person wanted to remain anonymous. Men like Paul Valenti, like others who were part of the greatest generation, had an uncommon perspective about life. For many of the World War II vets just returning home, was quite an accomplishment. Due to the adversity, the uncertainty, and the technological simplicity of the day, men like Paul Valenti carried with them the rest of their lives a certain lightness and humility not seen in the generations that have followed, the greatest generation. Paul's love of family, friends, athletics, Oregon State University, his country, a nice glass of red wine, a Toscani cigar, were things that drew people to Paul and Fran. Countless lives were touched by them both, and the beautiful memories they created will live long past their lives here on earth. How fitting to have this celebration of Paul's life right here in Gill Coliseum, where so many of our memories of Paul were made. To have Jane Stevenson, the daughter of Slats Gill, and Slats' grandson, Mike Stevenson, present with us today is a very special link and also a tribute to Paul and to Fran and the girls. Paul's passing truly marks the end of an era for the Oregon Staters who were among the greatest generation. Paul, you will be missed, dear friend. Now it's my turn. I told Nicole as I was coming in, I tried really hard to keep this to 5 minutes, and there's no way, okay? So bear with me. I think I got it down to 8, but with some of the other comments that have been made before me, it's slipping back up toward 10. Also, I can't see people, and that's hard. Anyway, sorry, Nicole, I tried. Paul didn't really want something like this. Jimmy and I have talked about that, and we talked about that several times, Paul and I told him, Paul, you've meant so much to this university that people are going to want to be in this Coliseum to let you go. And, Paul, right? He said, hell, I don't want it. I don't need it. They don't need to see me. They don't need to hear about me. But we're here, and we can feel Paul's presence here, I know. I love coming in here. I love coming in, and I always look to the corner, right there in that section behind the bench. And I never come to any Oregon State event ever without carrying Paul with me. I never saw Paul coach, but I can say with the greatest pride that over the past 11 years especially, besides my wife Barb, Paul has been my closest and best friend. Ooh. Paul, to use his own words, was a tough son of a buck. That's another saying. Sit that one away. He was also the gentlest man I ever knew. Paul had a really soft heart. I've been asked often how I met Paul. You know, a lot of times I know people were looking at me, especially in the last decade, and wondering, who is this little guy hanging around with Paul at all these games? Paul opened a lot of doors for me. Our paths first crossed at Timber Hill Athletic Club in 1987. I had just been hired to teach in the Corvallis School District. We connected initially over two things. We were both New York Yankee fans. I don't know where you are, John. I saw John Casey earlier. John's not a Yankee fan. We were both Yankee fans, and we were both proud of our Italian heritage. Our relationship evolved from there. For a while, he'd get my name wrong. Of course, right? I was Paul. When I got the nerve to remind him one day in the locker room that my name was Dominic, he kind of laughed that laugh, waved at me and said, "What the hell's the difference? You're a paisan." Then, of course, I got to know Jimmy, and I had to deal with Jimmy calling me Tony for a while. It's all good. It's all good. Anyway, for a kid from Brooklyn who grew up surrounded by a large family of first and second generation Italian immigrants, it was very special to me. Being with Paul, later being with Paul and Fran, and then later being with their family, it just felt like home, and it still does. In prepping for today, I came across a great quote from Jimmy, actually, in an interview he did a few years back, and it says it all way better than I could. When Paul took on a relationship, he did a good job of nurturing it and being a good friend to you. And that was Paul. And that describes one of Paul's best traits. Paul affirmed people. He uplifted them. You felt good when you were around Paul. I heard it said that Paul never had a bad day. I'm here to tell you he had some bad days. But the thing about Paul that made him special was he made sure that you didn't have a bad day when you were with him. Our relationship changed in October of 2003 out in the parking lot of Truax for the celebration of DeAndros. We happened to pull into the parking lot at the same time. As we walked into Truax, Paul introduced me to Fran. He invited Barb and me to coffee the next day at Starbucks. That began a tradition that continues today of Saturday morning coffee meetings with a regular group that included Nick and Janice Bonomo, Ed and Dortha Connect, and a revolving group of Beavers who Barb and I are privileged to call friends. We're keeping that tradition alive. Those Saturday coffees eventually became daily calls, then become multiple daily calls. Countless basketball, baseball, and football games that I've long ago forgotten how to count. Then it became dinner out with Paul and Fran, and then eventually holidays together with Paul and Fran, Joanne, Gina, Vicky, and Tom. Paul adopted us. Paul and Fran adopted us, and our lives were never the same. It humbled me when in recent years, as Paul made fewer games, someone inevitably would approach me and ask me how my dad was doing. Hope this is okay, guys. It humbled me, honestly. I'd always have to look away for a minute and ponder. And before answering that Paul was doing well, I'd tell him he wasn't my friend, just a close friend. He wasn't my dad, just a close friend. He's saying up there, don't screw it up. Paul quit driving in 2010, the same year I retired. That allowed us more time together. I'd pick him up usually in the afternoon and we'd head over to campus. First stop was always to look for Jess. We'd check in with Jess to see how he was doing. Then we'd head for the ticket office outside in Gill with a typical, hey, what are you guys doing in there today? Paul would announce his presence. For a brief minute or two, work would stop. Cecil, Pam, Luann, Shannon, and Linda would come out into the hallway or they'd invite us inside to talk. Next stop was usually baseball, to give Ron and the coaches a hard time and talk about the team and how the team was coming. Always, Paul was more interested in how everybody else was doing. He deflected questions about himself. Generally, he'd answer with, I'm hanging in there, or it's tough getting old, but I'm handling it. Again, Paul affirmed other people. On our way out, we'd stop by to say hi to Roz, Nicole, Jan, and the other folks in the foundation offices, now our Beaver Nation. We'd often run into Bob heading to or from a meeting. Bob, of course, would always stop, check in to see how Paul was, how Fran was doing, and then he'd remind Paul that he was still on the payroll and making sure that Paul was making those phone calls. Paul got a kick out of that always. Bob, I'm really glad that you, Sandra, and Mark got to visit Paul and Fran over lunch on that Thursday, late in August. He was feeling good that day, and I know you could tell how much he and Fran loved the visit. Some days we'd borrow one of Jess's carts, go down to the football field at Reeser to watch football practice. Paul enjoyed visiting with Coaches Riley, Coach Cav, and Coach Banker. Sometimes they'd bring a couple of players over. And Paul, as he often did when speaking with student athletes, would talk about just what Charlie and Mel talked about, their responsibilities to their teammates and to the university. And he'd also remind them what a privilege it was to be playing for the Beavers. He especially liked checking in with Coach Banker weekly on Thursday for their weekly phone call, where he'd call, and I know in a couple of those phone calls I was present, and he'd kind of end the call with, give those big shites hell this Saturday. He especially liked beating USC and UCLA in anything. In recent years, as Paul was confined to his wheelchair and he became physically weaker, a situation he hated, he would often just drive around campus with me and around town. Sometimes Paul smoking one of these Tuscanellis. He talked about how much change he'd seen on the campus of Oregon State and little old Corvallis, as he liked to say, when he stepped off that train in 1938. I'm really sorry, Nicole. My personally favorite times were sitting with Paul, Barb, Jimmy, and Fifi at Goss Stadium watching Beavers baseball. Doesn't get any better than that. I love sharing the game with him. I love listening to him and Jimmy, Bill and Annie Harper share a laugh and talking about old times. During the course of the game, inevitably he'd elbow me. I was going to cut this out, but they're here, so I can say this. He'd give me the elbow, and Evelyn and Dave Malpass were sitting close to us in our section, and he'd hit me and he'd lean down and he'd say, hey, see if she's got any of those oatmeal cookies. He loved those cookies, Evelyn. Then he'd usually, around the 5th, 6th inning, he'd lean over and he'd say, mind if we give Fran a call? I'd pull the phone out, hit the speed dial, and he always had a hard time manipulating it. You know, sometimes he'd hang up. He'd get on the phone, and I know everybody in Section E could hear, hey, honey, got the game on? Every game. put the phone away, and then usually late in the game, if we had a guy in scoring position, one of our batters was getting up to bat, Paul would always give him the word, be a hitter up there. And then he'd always follow that, always with, put the wood to it, kid. Didn't have the heart to talk to him about aluminum bats. A highlight for me during those games was and here at Gill, witnessing all the people who came by before games and in between innings to say hi. And that's how I got to know a lot of you. Paul greeted everybody with that classic smile. He'd ask about their families, how they were doing, and then as they walked off, he'd either lean over to me or to Jimmy, and he'd ask, right, who the hell was that? But again, Paul affirmed other people. I'm sure that some of them overheard that. He did it with me. For all that he did in his time here, it's an understatement to call Paul an ambassador. There is no word for it. Paul is one of the great all-time Beavers. He's been part of Oregon State since 1938. Even when he left for the war, he remained loyal to Oregon State. 77 years, right? Wrap your mind around that. The university isn't quite 150. Who does that anymore, in any profession, anywhere? In that time, Paul came to define what it means to be a Beaver. Show up, do your job, don't quit, don't take a shortcut, and do it all with a sense of pride, humility, and grace. And he always did it with that smile, all the while affirming other people. I'm so glad to see Paul being recognized like this. He deserves this, in spite of what he thought. Thanks, Coach Tinkle, for recognizing Paul's importance to Oregon State and for reaching out and visiting Paul with Jimmy this past June, right after you were hired. You talked about wanting to know the history of the university, and you got it. Paul enjoyed that visit. I know he enjoyed the phone calls with you. He was looking forward to watching you guys play this season, and he'll be with you all the way. And I know, and I have it on good authority, that you're going to make Coach proud of the way you play, win or lose. As you left that day, pulled out of the parking lot, he turned to me and he said, he's going to be a good Beaver. Again, Paul's affirming people. I'm getting there, Nicole. I'm going to forget a lot of names here. Scott, I want to thank you for being so personally supportive. Thanks to President Ray for recognizing Paul's importance to Oregon State and for initiating a conversation with me back in 2012 at the groundbreaking for the new basketball practice facility, which led to the interview conducted this past February by Chris Peterson of the Oregon State Archives, in which Chris captured Paul's historic knowledge of Oregon State in preparation for the Oregon State Sesquicentennial in 2018. Paul loved that interview, and that was the last public interview he did. Thank you to Bob and Sandra DeCarolis. Thanks, Mark. Thank you, Nicole. Thanks, Roz, Scott, everybody in our Beaver Nation for keeping Paul's spirit alive. And I apologize for forgetting names. There are too many. Bud, thank you for your phone calls, always checking in on Paul and how he was doing. Thanks for being such a good friend to Paul and Fran over the years. He always loved seeing you at Beaver games. Most of all, thanks, Fran. Thanks, Joanne and Gina, Vicki and Tom, for sharing Paul's life and sharing your lives with Barb and me. We love him. We love you. And Paul is with us and will be with us. Go Beavers. I didn't leave Jess much time, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Humble apologies, too, for only giving you 5 minutes. I know Mario Pastega told me long ago that it takes anyone about 3 minutes with Italian descent just to get their arms warmed up. Here you are, friend. All right, thank you, Dominic. Our next speaker is behind me here. Very interesting gentleman. He was two-time NC2A heavyweight champion wrestler. He was also a he was also an All-American football player with OSU. And to the amazement of the TV crowd a few years ago, talked a little bit about the famous giant killer game, the win over SC, which was 3-0, where Jess tackled O.J. Simpson as he was about to break away. Jess told the TV audience, the LA cops couldn't get him, but I did. Would you welcome Jess Lewis, please?
Hello, everyone. How we doing? You're probably wondering why I stood up here with Dominic. Well, I'm pretty sure he's an angel. Barb might not agree with that all the time, but I'm pretty sure he is because he came along just the right time for Paul and the family and what a God said. And so I'm hanging out with him quite a bit. So that was my idea. I didn't know he was going to be so long-winded, but no, anyway. A lot of you guys know my history and what I went through in my journeys, and I remember Paul so vividly when I first came back to Oregon State here, and he was going to put me to work. And I thought, Paul, you know, I had a scruffy old beard, and I was kind of down on my luck and everything. And I remember Paul says, "Hey, Lewis, sit up straight." So I'd do that, you know. And he said, "Shine your shoes. And then comb your hair, and then put a razor on that beard." And by golly, I did it, and I started feeling a lot better just from that. But he was always with me. He always helped me through my schooling and everything, and he never criticized. I don't think he really knew what effect he had on people, but he had a lot. And I know he saved my bacon a few times, and God love him for that, and God love your family for allowing us to have Paul. And it was just really neat. I think when God meets Paul up there, and I think probably already talked to him, but I'm pretty sure he would say to God, "Put a shine on those sandals. Put a rag on those sandals and sit up." And that's the way Paul was, and I love him so dear, and all I can say is thank you, family, and thank you, Paul, for being such a good friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jess. That was terrific. Fran, they left the Toscanellis up here. Next up, we have another video. It's from a former player, Victor Bartolome. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you.
Hi, this is Victor Bartolome. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words today. Fran, Joanne, and Vicki, I was so blessed that Paul gave me the opportunity of a lifetime in 1966 when he and Jimmy came to Santa Barbara and met my mom and dad and asked me to come to Corvallis and become a Beaver. That was the best thing I ever did. Paul was and always will be my hero. I think of him every day. I'm so blessed that my wife Barbara was also able to share a few visits with Paul. She now knows, as I always have, what a great man, a gentleman, my coach, my friend, Paul Valenti was. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So besides coaching, as you saw, Paul had a tremendous family here. Seen the pictures around and whatnot. And we're going to hear from a few of those family members right now. It's a pleasure to introduce to you nephew Mark Mazzetta. Mark.
Thank you. I should preface this by saying that I have never been to something like this where there are so many people that love my uncle. And and this is going to be a little bit out of order. It's not going to be as long as the other Italian, Cusimano. I said to myself, well, what can I find bad about this uncle of mine? And the only thing I can think of is when I would ask him, how do you like still working, recruiting students to work? And he said, they don't want to work. So it is with great honor and pleasure that I've been asked by my cousins that I have the privilege of saying a few words about my Uncle Paul and my Aunt Francine. My wife, Barbara, and I have had the pleasure to spend a couple of days with my cousins, Joanne and Vicky, as well as my other cousins from the Northwest, together with some of my aunt and uncle's closest friends. I have to say in all honesty that both of us have been overwhelmed by the love and respect shown by all to my uncle as well as my aunt. And this is what the redundancy is. I've even Googled in preparation to my uncle, to this speech and my uncle's name, and learned the many attributes that he has displayed as a human being, a man with tremendous compassion for others, as well as a man with great wisdom that he shared with his team in preparing them for life's mission. Francine and my mother were sisters in a family of 4 girls and a brother. I was raised in Larkspur in very close proximity of where my Uncle Paul was raised with his brother Boo. Both Fran and Paul had moved to Corvallis before I met them. They would both come to Larkspur during the summer for a week, bringing Joanne and Vicky later. They came to our home on numerous occasions, and the cousins played. It was always good to see them. My uncle and aunt were always very, very kind to us. In 1994, when I began to come through Corvallis on the way to Newport, Oregon for business, I would visit Paul and Fran at their home on Walnut, as well as later at Stony Point. Both of them were always glad to see me, as well as my wife, who occasionally would come along. I had dinner and breakfast with them numerous times. Everyone knew them in town, always saying, "Hi, Coach." It was really something for me. At one point, I had purchased some real estate to renovate in Corvallis. Paul took the time on his own to come down and see what I was doing, usually asking me, "Hey, Mark, what are you doing? What the hell are you doing there?" And I've come to think that if he didn't swear or use these words, when he spoke to you, he really didn't love you. The last time I visited him, he was doing laps in Stony Point parking lot, which the first time I went there, he told me he couldn't come in, he wasn't finished yet. He'd be running all over the place. Still a smile, but he said, this is not good. I don't like this running around, but he always had that smile. He relayed a story to me when he brought my Aunt Fran to Corvallis. And he said, you know, upon approaching Corvallis in the distance, Fran asked me, "Where is this place?" He replied, "See that little light in the distance? That's it." Who knew at that time that my Uncle Paul would bring a great light that would leave a halo over Corvallis forever, as well as over many people. My uncle has been referred to as a legend by some, and when I saw that, I looked the word up, and It really means a traditional story, sometimes popularly regarded as historical fact, but unauthenticated. Nothing could be further from the truth. From an outside observer, he left a footprint in Corvallis that is real and authenticated, and is exemplified by those who follow him today. He was truly a man to emulate in every respect. God bless you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Next, we have some additional family. We have Gail and Craig Monahan, niece and nephew, and if you would come up now, please.
Well, I better get with the program here and get going. So thanks to everyone for coming to honor Coach, my Uncle Paul. And to all you guys wearing wingtips, I hope they're really polished. And many thanks to the university for honoring Coach in such a gracious way. He would be very humbled and very appreciative. Being one of Coach's nephews, it became natural for me to call him Coach because he and my dad were my role models and mentors. And I think I tested Coach's patience on occasion. I wasn't that great an athlete. And I remember he pitched batting practice to me one time for about 45 minutes, and I still couldn't hit the curveball. But he was tremendously kind, nonetheless. My dad and Coach grew up together in Marin County. Were teammates at Tamalpais High School, and ended up marrying two of the Lake Nido sisters. So we had a dual relationship there. They played on the tennis and baseball teams together. And Coach was at third base, and my dad was at second. Coach had the better arm and had really good hands, and he could handle the hot corner. Such a strong arm, actually, he would occasionally throw his arm out of the socket, and my dad would have the distinct privilege of putting it back in. Yeah, Coach and my dad lived a couple of blocks apart in Larkspur, and this setting gave Coach an opportunity to warm up his legendary booming voice. He would walk out on his front porch and start yelling for Dad to meet him up at the tennis courts. And it probably wouldn't be something like, "Hey Keith, you want to go play tennis?" It would be more like, "Hey Bones, get your butt up to the tennis courts." He would really, his voice is still resounding through the halls of Gill. And he used that same communication method with my son Mark, who was here at OSU. He'd drive by the Sigma Chi house and roll down the window and just start yelling until somebody came out of the building. Hey, Mark, come on, Monahan, where the hell are you? Come on, get out of here. That's Coach's version of voicemail and instant messaging. So these tennis matches they had were quite intense once they made it to the court. And Paul's brother, Boo, and my grandfather, Artie, would join in, and they would play doubles on occasion, and intense and competitive, imagine that. Who would think? And generally, as Jimmy had alluded to earlier about the commissioner of the court, most of the line calls were quick and they were out. So, But yeah, the intensity was there. My grandfather got a couple of his front teeth knocked out with the forehand volley. So, and Coach always said, you know, you play hard, there's plenty of time to shake hands afterwards. And as a tennis player, and I had the privilege to play against him in doubles a few times, he had some of the greatest hands and the greatest feel and touch at the net. I've never seen anybody hit such severe short angle volleys wide of the court. I haven't seen it since, to produce winning points. And Coach would just say, oh, not a big deal. You know, this is what I do all the time. We went to a lot of ball games together and used to have a stogie on the way to the game before it became unfashionable. And then the later years started driving to the game. And one time we pulled up, went around this end of the stadium and pulled up by the elevator against the south side of the stadium, and he turned the car off and he smiled and looked over at me and he says, now what the hell are we doing here? We had a great laugh. And I noticed in seeing that one slide on that Twin City Fuel and Ice slide where he worked in Larkspur at next door, and both there and in Epidendio's Market, another good Irish name, Epidendio's Market. So he and my dad worked there together, and amazingly they had any kind of red wine that you wanted. No one knew that it came out of the same barrel, but it was any kind that you wanted. So in those days, you brought in your own bottle, and they would nod politely and go in the back and relabel it, just put a new label on. So everybody was happy. Last Thursday was a rough loss to Utah, but there was a partial win that night because Paul's beloved San Francisco Giants, he also liked the Giants in addition to the Yankees, won on a walk-off homer to advance to the World Series, so that would have made Coach very happy. One of my early memories with Coach when the team would travel to Pullman when he was an assistant, and he and Slats and Jimmy and Ropes would come over to the house. It was a long weekend because in those days you stayed there and you played Idaho and you did other things. It was just not an in and out sort of thing. So we would have dinner at the house, and everybody really loved Dad's Manhattans and my mom's wonderful meals. And Ropes would recite some poetry, have a little fire burning, and very pleasant winter memories. That is, if you could get to Pullman in the first place because of the ice and snow and fog. And Mel and Charlie and Jimmy know about that. I'm a little bit conflicted because, as Robert De Niro says, because half Cougar, half Beaver. My dad was the chairman of the art department at Washington State for ages, and then having this real close connection to Coach. So it was a tough time for me when the Cougars and the Beavers played. Depending on who was having the winning season, that's generally where I would roll. So speaking of those wonderful Manhattans that my dad used to make for them, the next time you're having one or sipping on a glass of red wine, and by the way, it's permissible to add water to dilute those things, that's fine also. Raise your glass and think of Coach fondly, as I will, and salute Coach. God bless you. Thank you.
Well, Craig really expressed everything about that really means so much to our family and all of us and all of our time that we've spent together all these years. And one of the things that I can extend a little bit on Craig's comments, not to be redundant, when my son Keith used to come to OSU in the summers to play Beaver basketball camp and also with his traveling team in the AAU. Paul always took all the time to spend with Keith before the games, would watch all his games, every one of them, every minute of his games, would sit and carefully just kind of like take all these mental notes he could talk with Keith about later. These are such precious kinds of gifts that Keith and I will always cherish, as well as all the years of childhood and memories with all the family and everyone. And I just feel I'm so lucky to have had a role model like Paul, to have taught all of us to take time for each other. Paul always had time for every one of us, and I will always treasure that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail and Craig. We appreciate your comments. A number of you remember Jay Cardi when he played basketball here. Next up is a video that's sent in by Jay. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jay Cardi, class of 62. I played basketball at Oregon State. Paul Valenti asked me to speak at his memorial service. Health reasons, I can't be there, but through technology, I'll be able to keep my promise to Paul. I first met Paul Valenti in the spring of 1958. I was a 16-year-old high school senior on a recruiting visit. Paul picked me up at the Eugene airport, and in the course of our drive to Corvallis, I could see that he was a very determined man and passionate about Oregon State. I noticed that he dressed really well. His shirt was crisp and pressed. He had a deep pleat in his slacks, and he wore super, super shiny shoes. Rooks couldn't play varsity in those days. Paul served as Slat-Skill's assistant, but he also coached the Rooks. And the tenacity that I picked up in the car was expressed on the basketball floor in spades, and I knew I wasn't in high school anymore. One of his players once said, "When do we start having some fun around here?" And Paul said, "At Oregon State, we have a wonderful intramural program where they have lots of fun. Perhaps you'd like to try that." My sophomore year, we were in Seattle at the Olympic Hotel, and Slat-Skill had a heart attack. Paul took over the team. We knew he was going to make a great coach. And it was there that he began to work on his signature move. We called it the foot stomp sock pull. He'd pull up his socks, and then a referee would make him mad with a bad call, or a kid would make a bad play, and he'd stomp his feet on the floor. And that was the preparation for when he was a head coach, and he did that in spades too. He wore Florsham shoes, big Florshams, and had metal cleats on them, and he put holes in the Gill Coliseum floor, and I'm told those boards actually had to be replaced from the foot stomp sock pull. Jimmy Anderson served as the Rook coach as Paul became Slats' full-time assistant. And when Jimmy moved to full-time assistant, I coached the Rooks for a couple of years. My relationship with Paul deepened during that time. It's one thing to be a coach and a player. There's always a little distance. But as a mentor coach to a budding coach, we became great friends. And after practice, Bill Harper, Paul Valenti, and myself would oftentimes play 3 football coaches in what we called hunch. It was 3-on-3 over in the corner of Gill Coliseum. And on the days the football coaches couldn't show, well, then Harp and Paul played me, and Paul made the rules. I couldn't score in the paint or anywhere near it, and they could foul me as much as they wanted to, and I couldn't call fouls. And when I'd beat them anyhow, Paul would get mad, and I'd laugh at him for getting mad, and that would make him all the madder, and all the fun we had over in the corner playing hunch and and becoming deep friends. In 1984, Paul became interested in spiritual things, and his daughter took him to a church in Portland. And at the end of the service, he responded to the altar call. He went forward, confessed his sin, and asked Jesus Christ to be his Savior. He entrusted his soul to the care and keeping of Jesus Christ. A few years later, I was leading a Bible study in Corvallis, and Paul was in it. We talked about all kinds of things, including the decision that he'd made in Portland. And then he talked about baptism. I told him that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. And if you'd like to identify with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we could get that done for you. He said he wanted to. We had a mutual friend in Don Snow. We all belonged to the Timber Hill Athletic Club. So that's where we went, and in the corner of the swimming pool at Timber Hill, we baptized Paul in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It was then that he asked me if I would speak at his memorial service, whenever that might be, and I told him I would, of course. On subsequent visits to Corvallis, I'd always see Paul, and he'd always make sure that I was going to speak. And the last time I saw him was 2007. And as we departed, he said, you're going to speak for me, right? I said, I got your back, Paul. If I can get there, I will. We'll figure it out somehow. It's a time for grief. Fran lost her husband of 68 years. Grieve with her. Vicki and Joanne, they lost their dad. Grieve with them. And we'll grieve for a season. We lost a good friend. But you don't have to grieve for Paul. Paul's in heaven with his heavenly Father. Christ is nearby. And it just doesn't get any better than that. And when the time comes to wear clothes, you can be sure that his will be well pressed with creases in the pants, and he will be wearing super, super shiny shoes. May God richly bless you as you make life's most important decision. Thank you.
It's a tremendous video, and I'm sure we'll all pass our thanks on to Jay for sending that in. It was just terrific. Next, we have I want to say almost lifelong friend of Paul's. He played basketball for OSU. One of his close friends here, right in Corvallis, Tim Hennessy. Tim.
Thank you. I also grew up in Larkspur, California, believe it or not, about 1 block away from where Paul and Boo grew up. They were on Acacia, I was on Holcomb. His cousin was on Palm. All of them could have fit into this gym. I came to Oregon State University in 1972. Paul was done coaching, excuse me. I was just starting to play. I walked in the gym, and I remember seeing Paul in Gill Coliseum one of the first days I was here, and I was frankly shocked because I came from a big Irish Catholic family and from an era where when your dad came home from work, they sat down and they had what they called highballs and a couple glasses of wine with dinner, maybe a cigarette, and they went to bed. I walked in and saw Paul Valenti, who I've now figured out was 52 years old, but at that time I was 18, like you guys, and I thought he was older than Moses. And this guy was unbelievably fit. He walked in his workout outfit, and I just didn't understand how people worked out. Didn't know they worked out at that age. Fast forward it 4 or 5 years, and I coached here for a couple years. So I had the privilege of being down in the coaching locker room. Got invited to those, and during the time period, I would see Paul playing tennis in town, and I would see Paul biking around town. But I'd never been involved in any of the hunch games. Well, Paul at that time was playing racquetball. He would have been 56 or 57. And they didn't use rackets because they couldn't afford them, racquetball rackets. They used sawed-off tennis rackets with about 2 inches of tape on the handles. And when you went into the racquetball court, it was a complete battle. And you talked about getting teeth knocked out. I mean, people would just get tattooed with these things. And that's the first time I saw Paul in his Jetson outfit, which was a full plastic top that he would wear so he could sweat more. And his workouts were phenomenal. And then at that time period, they opened up Timber Hill Athletic and Court Club, and he would go up there and sit on the bike, and then he'd be plastic from neck to toe. And just a grinder. He would just grind out these workouts and grind out these workouts. And then eventually they got a swimming pool at Timber Hill, and Paul would swim laps with one arm. One arm he would swim laps because the other arm, I guess, had been dislocated so many times and he would just grind out these laps. And he was just a phenomenal, competitive, tenacious, physical individual. Well, I got out of coaching. Thank God. Good luck, Coach. And went into business, was blessed in business, and wanted to buy a house in the neighborhood that Paul was in. The only way you could get into that neighborhood really was if somebody died. But Paul called me and said, I think our neighbors are going to sell their home. So I went over and knocked on the door, and they answered, and they said, well, we're thinking about it. We're going to go away for 2 weeks, and we'll let you know when we come back. So I called Paul up. And I think it was 753-3731. Was that your home number? Yeah. I called Paul up every day. And after about 5 days, it was, hey, kid, you need to handle this one on your own. Suck it up. So I drive by, and they did come back early. I did go in and I bought the house, and that was 29 years ago. So Paul was my neighbor. And God, what a great neighbor. And the first thing Paul wanted to do was park his blue Volkswagen in the garage because it was immaculate. And he could keep it inside. And he'd come over. Of course, he didn't want anything for free, so he'd come over. And this is before I was married. I lived there for about 5 years before I was married. And he'd come over and sweep out the garage and sweep the driveway after he'd been done, manicuring his lawn and sweeping his lawn. You could eat off his lawn. It was immaculate. No, you couldn't. Yeah, you couldn't step on the lawn. It was just phenomenal. And he cursed every tree in the neighborhood. So I married Christine, who Paul thought was Christina, and still is Christina. We almost changed Christine's name because it'll always be Christina with Paul. When he'd lock in on that name, that was the name he had for you. So we were married for about 6 months, and Christina came in one day and said, do you think I could park my car in the garage? Because Paul still kept parking his car in the garage, and I didn't want to ask Paul not to park his car in the garage. My yard was immaculate. So I went over, and Paul said, oh, sure, that's fine. And then we had our kids. And and Paul and Fran were so great to our children. But Paul's house was where you are, and there was a little alley and a hedge between us. The alley barely enough to fit a car, and a hedge. And I'd come out in the mornings, and Paul would hear me out in the morning, just like he did when he was growing up. Hey, Tim, how are you? And I'd yell back. I couldn't see him. I'm doing great, Paul. How are you today, Tim? Good. And then I'd make the mistake, because I never could get a response back to his response. I'd go, how are you, Paul? Ah, geez. I won't make a pimp on a man's behind today, Tim. And I'd say, I never knew what to say back. So I'd say, well, have a great day, Coach. So as things progressed, we had our kids, and Fran and Paul were so great. They were our neighbors for 13 years before they moved. And they were so great to our kids. And Paul would come out, with the penny loafers on at that time, just shining. You could see yourself in the penny loafers. His pants were, Paul did not believe in breaks in your pants. So they'd be about up to here, which is the way the Italians wore them. So we'd tease each other about that, and then Fran would come out, and she was so elegant, and she could dress so beautifully, and she was so sophisticated. And my wife, and it wasn't like they had a lot of money. Fran could just put it on and wear it, and it looked great. My wife was so inspired by her. Fran has a friend named Lucy Newton that said she could model a rag and make it look good. Well, she would look like that every day, every day. Then going forward a little bit, Paul did become very deep in his faith. And the Lord tells us that only good fruit can come from a good tree. And only the way to produce good fruit is with humility, perseverance, and faith. All three big characteristics of Paul. Big characteristics. And his fruit is sitting here. His fruit is sitting here right now. An abundance in fruit. The Valentis have touched so many families, and we are so blessed that we have them in our community. I see Jesus right now, I've thought about this, with his arms around Paul saying, "Good job. Well done, my good and trusting servant. Good job. You made a difference." Well, one thing Paul always did when he left the house in his blue Volkswagen was, and I know the daughters and Fran remember this, was beep, beep. He'd always beep, beep when he'd leave the house to say bye to Franny, and he'd get down to the end of the alley there and beep, beep again. And then when he was coming home in the blue Volkswagen every night, he'd be a block from the house, beep, beep. And then when he pulled into the driveway, or they didn't have a driveway, in a little place behind his house where he could park, beep, beep. Well, my friend, beep, beep. You've done a wonderful job. You made a difference. May you rest in eternal peace with our Lord. Beep, beep, Paul, we love you.
Thanks very much, Tim. That was terrific. Next, we have Paul's granddaughter, Gina Jernigan. Gina?
Well, next time I know not to follow Tim. I'm not good at public speaking, so this could go south fast, I'll warn you. The main reason that I decided that I wanted to talk was because I really wanted to say thank you to all of you here. Everyone who's here today, the people who couldn't make it, people who've been gone for a long time, you're all part of my memories of my grandpa. Oregon State was such a huge part of who he was, and he had such a huge impact on my life, shaped my childhood and who I am today. I can't remember a time going anywhere with Grampy that people didn't stop him to say hi, to tell them about how they knew him, what son or father, daughter, wife, mother, sister he'd helped or coached. Because of that, when I was little, I really genuinely thought we were famous. So, you know, when I think of him, I think of all of you. I think of the campus and people like Ed Lewis, Mel Counts, Don McGaley, Charlie White, Jess Lewis, Jimmy Anderson, Dee Andros, Martin Shavs, Hal Moe. I remember coming to the games and meeting the players. We would come watch practices sometimes. He would bring me to see Jimmy. And I had convinced myself when I was a kid that Jimmy Anderson was Santa Claus. So I always tried to be very, very good when I was around him because I really wanted a pony. And we used to ride our bikes all over campus, all over Corvallis. I knew the way to Grampy's office from our seats over there with my eyes closed. We zoomed around campus in the blue bug. I held on for dear life. When I visited, sometimes he would let me come to work with him. We were going to the office, kid, come on. And we'd stop and get donuts, and he'd say, "Don't tell Grandma." We fed the horses at the horse barn. We played tennis in those tennis courts over there. When they lived on 31st, we'd walk to the games. You know, it seemed like the whole town was coming out. Everybody had their orange on, and you're all bundled up, and Grandma's got a bag full of snacks with sandwiches, and cookies. It was great. Some people already know my dad died when I was really little, and there's that saying that when God closes one door, he opens another. Grampy was my other door. I always thought he was 10 feet tall. And so there are things that I'm proud of, and when I think about why, it's because they came from him. All my friends, if you know me well, it's a running joke. I can be, and usually am, really loud. I've always been told to use my indoor voice my whole life. And if you talk to Grampy, especially on the phone, you know where that came from. That man did not need speakerphone at all. The other one is Oregon State. I didn't go to school here. I had this picture in my head that I'd be followed around by Secret Service, and everybody would be constantly reporting to Grandma and Grandpa what I was doing. So, but I've always been really proud to be a Beaver fan. Grandpa always made me feel like we were on the right side of history, if that makes sense. Not because we're the winningest program, but because here at this school, people care about you. People helped you out, and they believed in you. Here, being a good person, doing the right thing, and loyalty was of higher value than trophies. The fact that I can still say that and believe that in our current culture is a big deal. The fact that I know without a doubt he was still as proud to be a part of this school on the day he died as the day he committed to it makes me even more proud. So again, thank you for all the memories, and go Beavs.
Thanks so much, Gina. That was terrific. Next, we have some additional family, and we're getting toward the end of this program. But we've got Paul's two daughters going to speak next. First, I'd like to welcome Vicki and her husband, Tom Joins, up to the podium.
Well, I'm glad to see these Toscanis here. It used to be, Paul says, well, I'm out of cigars. So what I would do was, I would call Rich's Tobacco Store. Now, I'm down in San Francisco. So I would call Rich's Tobacco Store and have them ship me in Portland and have them mail the cigars to me because it was cheaper. There's no out-of-state charges. So then I would mail them back to Paul. So he would call me and say, can you get me some more of those cheap cigars? So when I see these, I probably sent these to him. Okay, it's already been introduced. My name is Tom Joins, and I'm Paul Valenti's son-in-law. I grew up in North Carolina and came from a very broken family. Excuse me. I left home at the age of 15 years old after finishing college and a stint in the U.S. Army. I found myself living in the San Francisco Bay Area in the mid-'70s, and I had a job as a pharmaceutical sales rep. At that point, I had the great fortune of meeting my wife, future wife-to-be, Vicki Valenti, who was working with United Airlines. After several months dating, I finally had the chance to meet Vicki's parents at her apartment in Belmont. Paul and I immediately started talking about college basketball and sports in general. My shoes must have been properly shined, or I would not be standing up here today. After Vicki and I got married in 1979, I found out that Paul and Fran left to travel. So I started setting up yearly trips for us. It was a good thing for Vicki had passes so we could travel very cheaply. Our first trip was to Kruger National Park in South Africa in 1980. And over the years, we traveled to over 50 countries and 6 continents together, with the last trip coming in 2001 in Italy. On that last trip, we were with Paul's relatives in Bobbio, Italy, having dinner when we learned about the attacks on our country. It was September the 11th, 2001. I would like to share some of those great times we had together. Okay, yeah. Over the years, I was amazed how many times people would come up to Paul and say, hello. Like the time we were playing golf in the outback of Australia, when the man playing behind us yelled out, hey, Paul! At the time we were on a cruise in the Bay of Islands in New Zealand, the guy yells out, hey, Paul! And then we were at the Eiffel Tower, and guess what? Hey, Paul! And you know, it just, I was so impressed that all these people knew Paul, and I realized what an amazing person he was. And a funny side of a joke, on a trip to New Zealand, we were at a zoo in Wellington, sitting in a lion cage. Well, Paul kept giving this lion just a line of grief, just hissing and like this back and forth. And so this lion had had enough. He turned around and backed up and shot a laser beam and caught Paul right in the head in his Oregon State cap. And it was so funny. I took pictures of all this, and I put it on Paul's desk, but strangely it disappeared. Through the years, we had so many trips together, and I realized what great people Paul and Fran were. Excuse me. I also realized they were the family I never had growing up. In closing, I'm very honored to stand up here and express my love for Paul and the Valenti family. I am so glad my shoes were shined that day 35 years ago. Thank you.
So, I've thought of this day many times in my life, wondering how I could put into words all that my father means to me. And now that this day is here, I'm still searching for those words. So I'm going to start with just a few special moments. Like when I was in the 2nd grade, I came home from Harding School, and I told my mom I had to bring something to show and tell the next day. So Mom went to a drawer in the desk, and she pulled out an article from the newspaper. The headline of the article said, Coach Valenti had one more daughter. Well, in my mind, I read that as being a negative. Oh no, that Dad would have rather had a son. But as the years went by, I knew that didn't matter. My dad was really strict with Joanne and I. Doing the right thing was instilled in us at a very young age. How important it was to treat everyone like they were important, because they were. No matter what job they held or what they did for a living, and to be kind to everyone. And we were expected to respect authority and go along with the program. Rules were made for a reason, and you followed them. Not that Joanne and I didn't rebel now and then. We tried, but in the end, we knew our boundaries and what was right and wrong. During Dad's basketball years, both as assistant and as head coach, I remember as a kid that those years were both happy and sad. My dad, of course, took his position very, very seriously, along with the intense responsibility he felt to the college. His love for the school and all that it had given him drove him to give 150% of himself at all times. I remember the pressure I alone felt as a child for my father to win basketball games, and I could only imagine what Dad was going through. When we were winning, things were wonderful. When we were losing, well, sometimes that wasn't so fun. I remember one morning after a loss, I don't remember who it was to, but it was a big, important game. We woke up, I looked out the front window, and there was a for sale sign on our front lawn. I don't know where that came from. Not good. But Dad loved what he did, and he loved Oregon State with all that was in him. He truly gave 72 years of his life here, loving every moment, and so appreciative of what it had given him and our family in return. That respect for doing a job well carried over with me in my career with United Airlines, for which I flew for 32 years. I took great pride in doing my job well, both professionally and with kindness. And that my father taught me. Dad was very proud of me in my flying career, and both Mom and Dad, like Tom said, flew all over the world with us. The four of us flew once a year to somewhere in the world, and this went on from 1980 to 2011. From Singapore and Asia to Africa, Australia, New Zealand, South America, Scotland, Ireland, and much of Europe. We traveled to Italy several times, visiting Dad's family that resides presently in Torino and Rome. Dad's mom, our grandmother, was at one time the governess for the last king and queen of Italy, King Emmanuel. And she helped raise their children, Prince Umberto, and the two princesses, Yolanda and Mafalda, before coming over to America. So on our first trip over to Italy, our family in Rome arranged for a private tour of the palace in Rome. We were shown the exact room my grandmother lived in when she worked in the palace, along with other private rooms and ballrooms. Dad was so grateful, as we all were, to learn more about our heritage and to meet our extended family in Italy. It was wonderful, and those are memories we'll always have. I think I'm going to stop here, but not before doing something I know my dad would want me to do, and which absolutely comes from the bottom of my heart. And that is to thank each and every one of you for being here today. Thank you so very much, and my father would be so grateful. One of the greatest gifts my dad gave me was in the last week and a half of his life. For me to be able to be with him, help care for him, and to say goodbye. For that, I will always be thankful. I love you, Dad. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom and Vicki. It's wonderful to hear the personal perspective. Our last speaker is daughter Joanne Jernigan. Joanne.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It is such an honor and a blessing to be celebrating Dad's life with all of you who have come to show your love and respect for him. And I know in his lifetime, he returned the love to this community, and especially OSU, the athletes and supporters. He loved being a Beaver, and it was the joy of his life, as you all know. And as my sister said, my dad was known for being a tough disciplinarian as a coach, and as she said, as a father too. He came by that probably from his mother, Constance, known as Costi, who was, of course, our grandmother. And Dad always said she was really tough. And as Vicki also said, Grandma was raised in a small Protestant village in northern Italy called Bobbio Pellice, near the French border and the Alps. And she was a descendant of the Waldensians, a group of strong Bible-believing Christians who were severely persecuted for their faith in the Bible and the gospel of Christ. And as Vicki said, she was chosen by the Queen of Italy to be a governess. I mean, what a privilege and an honor. And when we grew up, the pictures of the princesses were in her bedroom. And they must have been in their kind of mid-teen years, and they had long, wavy, dark hair down to their waists, and they were beautiful. And to me, it's just an amazing, amazing story that she got to work there. And she must have been an excellent teacher of young people, to have been chosen by the Queen to raise royalty. And I believe that Dad had that gift of teaching too. And he loved people and, of course, sports. And I believe that he loved to train and teach. He has even been called a life coach, as we know. And what an honor. I thank OSU for that. Well, the Lord called me to teach as well. Shortly after I was born again in 1981, Jesus coined that term in the book of John where he said, "You must be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven." How it happened for me was that I had postpartum the baby blues extremely after the birth of my beautiful daughter, Gina. I was a complete atheist at the time, not even knowing whether God existed. I had never owned a Bible or knew anything that was in the Bible, but I cried out to God. I was so desperate. My hormones, I guess, were just turned upside down. I was ecstatic to have a beautiful daughter. But I didn't even know if God existed. And he sent someone to me. And he sent an old friend of my husband. And she just said, "You just need Jesus." And I started going to a small black church in Northeast Portland on Union Avenue. And that brought me to my knees one day in my home, where I asked the Lord in my heart. And again, as I said, it was in 1981. And I was radically changed. It was a powerful, powerful experience. And it was like the Lord was in the room with me. And from that point on, I was forever changed. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new." And I was a totally different person. I taught in Christian schools at the elementary level for 17 years in the Portland area, and also have taught Bible studies in prisons and jails to women for almost 20 years, as well as overseas on 5 different mission trips. I currently go into the Benton County Jail to teach women the Bible. And my first mission trip was in Czechoslovakia in 1991, and Gina came with me. And at the time, she hated going, but now she says it's one of the best experiences of her life. And my second mission trip was to Ukraine to teach in a convocation of teachers of that nation. And then my last 3 trips were to Africa. I'm starting to get my mouth starting to stick together. Excuse me. The next 3 trips were to Africa, to Swaziland, and Uganda, where I taught Bible in women's conferences in prisons, went on safaris. I even visited one of the queens of Swaziland in her castle, and even cast out demons. I know that's wild. It was a wild stuff, but it just really showed the power of God at work. I don't know if my pictures have been up there with me with Dad and Gina, but one of the pictures was going to be, it doesn't look like we have pictures. Okay, well, I'll skip all that. Let's see. And my mom and Dad saw the huge change in my life when I came to the Lord, and they also asked the Lord into their lives in 1984 at the altar of my church, as Jay mentioned. And Dad began reading the Bible and going to Jay's Bible study and was baptized in the Timber Hill Pool, as he mentioned. And since my dad died, I've been paging through his Bible to find the wonderful things that he wrote in it, and I'll share some of them with you. Inside the front cover, he wrote in a dull pencil, "The theme of the Bible, how to have eternal life." Eternal life, isn't that something that we can only find out from God? The Bible tells us it truly is God's book, and still the #1 bestseller every year, selling many times more than any other book. You probably all know that. Anyway, in Genesis, he underlined, God said, "Let us make man in our image." I like that a lot better than in the image of a monkey. And at the end of Matthew, he wrote, again in a dull pencil, "Disciple, a grown-up convert who will spread the word." Rather than keeping silent, Jesus' great commission is, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel." And next to Galatians 5:22, he wrote in the Bible, where it talks about the fruit of the Spirit, he said the main quality of love is patience. And that's one of the hardest things to do sometimes, is to be patient. And I saw that in my dad, that he was very patient and loving with all people. And I was amazed to find this gold mine of insight into Dad's relationship with the Lord. It gives me great hope for where he is right now and of seeing him again in eternity. Also, every night for years, Dad would read the Bible to Mom in bed. It was so cute. And I would witness this when I would come down to visit them on the weekends, as I did for years when they were in their 70s and 80s. In closing, I want to say that I am very proud of my dad. He was a faithful man. He was faithful to his marriage, to his family, to the community, and to OSU. He was not perfect, by far, as none of us are, but faithful, and I thank God for him. God bless you all. Thank you so much for letting me share with you. And one more thing, the three of us, my daughter's coming up and my sister, and we want to give some more thanks. You guys, I'll come down there in the front. I'll just come down there. There's just some things we need to, or some people we need to give great thanks to. We'd like to thank hospice, beginning with Dad's doctor, Dr. Eric Sharp, for his true concern in wanting the best care for Dad, both physically and on a personal level. Once he ordered hospice, they went right into action, and I know any of you that have had experience with hospice, they're absolutely amazing. As Dad's pain became very difficult to manage, hospice offered to bring Dad to the hospice house in Albany. And from the moment Joanna and I walked into the house, we knew this was where Dad could spend his last days in peace. He never again felt a bit of pain and was surrounded with people who truly are angels on earth. And we cannot thank hospice enough. Thank you.
We are just on behalf of the family, I'm thanking Oregon State University, and especially for today's event, we wanted to thank Bob Takarelis, Mark Massari, and Nicole Markel.
And I wanted to thank Stony Brook Assisted Living and Stony Brook Lodge for the wonderful care and love they continually showed to Dad. Above the call of duty, I'm talking about loving people who continually showed kindness, as well as giving excellent care. We specifically wanted to thank Kathy and Kendall. I don't know if they're here from Stony Brook Lodge, but if they are, I would like them to stand. I don't see them. And also Adam and Leslie from Stony Brook Assisted Living. If they're here, I would love for them to stand. Okay. And all the sweet young people that show love and kindness and respect to the elderly day in and day out. We were so blessed for the care that they both received there. And no matter how the disposition of those they serve, that's real dedication. And lastly, I want to thank Terry, and I do see her standing there. Would you please stand? Sitting there, who took care of Dad for 2 to 3 years and did all the hard and difficult things that caregivers do, but with faithful love, encouragement, and even cheerfulness, Terry. Thank you so much. She's an angel. Thank you.
I am very, very proud of Oregon State University. They gave me a chance, and I was fortunate to get in a program with a dedicated, tough son of a gun that demanded not only to do your job right on the court, but to do the job right off the court. And if it wasn't for that type of a situation, I might not have never made it. So I thank so many people. I've got so many people to thank. The athletes that have been through here, the great athletes that we had from the time I started here until a few years back. Great coaches that we had. Great esprit de corps that we had on the campus. And old Martin Shavs, this makes it a little bit extra for me too. because I got to tell you a little story about old Martin Shabs and I. We came here together in 1938. He was from Baker, Oregon, and I was from the San Francisco area. Slats had a hard time getting me in school in 1938. Thanksgiving comes and I'm going home for Thanksgiving. Had a car, had a ride, a couple of guys were going down, I'm going home. Slats called me in the office. He says, Paul, you're not going home. You're staying here and do your schoolwork and get caught up and stay in the league. Well, I left the office with tears, but it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. So Martin Shabs and I, we check in 1938. He was a football player and I was a basketball player. And there wasn't too many athletes around at that time, and we had a great esprit de corps. All the football players, baseball, track guys, wrestlers, basketball, we knew each other, and we went out with each other and fooled around and smoked cigars once in a while. And we had a great time. And we had successful teams. Our basketball teams during that period of time from 38 through 42 won 2 championships. The 39 football team was a great football team, lost to Howard Jones's great University of Southern California team for the Coast Championship. And then in 1942, we went to the Rose Bowl. But we all had something different happen to us. Pearl Harbor. 1941, all of us, 98%, 99% of all the athletes on the campus at that time had to go to war. Martin was a B-38 fighter pilot in Europe. I spent 3.5 years on an aircraft carrier in the Southern Pacific. The training that I got, and I can only speak for myself on this, through Slats Gill's program, made it possible for me to handle the situation. When I came here, I had a speech impediment. I stuttered. At the end of my 4 years of school, I had a couple of turns to go to graduate, but I didn't have the confidence, so I went in as a sailor. I went in as a sailor. Went through boot camp, 18, 19-year-old kids, and the ability that Slats gave to me to make adjustments made it just that much easier, and I had a lot of fun being a sailor. Then we all came back in 1946 and 47. Slats made me promise that if I made it through to come back, get my degree, which I did in the spring of 1946 and started coaching then. Slats Gill, the head basketball coach, was the freshman baseball coach. That's the way it was in those days, gang. He said, Paul, how about taking this freshman baseball team over for me, will you? And I said, sure. I was a good baseball fan. I played some, so that's how I got started. Then I was going into basketball with him. I was his first full-time assistant. It was a different league in those days, gang. So you guys out there and you gals out there, appreciate what you have. Appreciate the opportunities that you have through your athletics. There's thousands of young people outside that would love to be in your shoes. So appreciate it. And then because down through the years, as you get older and you look back, you're going to say that the 4 or 5 years that I spent on the Oregon State campus were the best years of my life. And I know what I'm talking about. So that's about all I got to say. I could stay up here and tell you stories and anything, but I don't want to miss one thing. I want to introduce my wife, Francine. We've been married 55 years, buddy. Hang in there, baby.
terrific. That was from the 2001 Benny Award, so it was a little bit ago, but there you go. It's from the heart from Paul. It's time for thank yous, and there are many to pass around. First, thank you for everyone that spoke today. I thought it was terrific. I appreciate Julie Williams singing the Star Spangled Banner and Naval ROTC coming in with the colors as well. It really added a nice touch to everything. Thank you to Nicole Markell, who put this whole thing together. She did just a fabulous job. And thanks to Melissa Hollis for the good video and the video guys back there. It was just terrific. One last person I'd like to thank on here. He's not here with us today, but I'm sure he can hear me, and that's Paul Valenti. They're people that I class as energy absorbers. If you stand next to them for a while and talk to them, it's here's what's wrong with me, here's what's wrong with life, et cetera, and you walk away from that person, you're not feeling too good. So you lost some of your energy. Paul was the opposite of that. If you talked to Paul for 2 minutes, you felt better about everything, including yourself. So a big time thank you to Paul for all the people that he touched throughout all the 94 years of his life. I know he made better people out of them and certainly a better place out of this world. So Paul, thanks a million. I'd like to thank Coach Wayne Tinkle and the team. Thanks for bringing these guys. This was great. This is terrific. I want the family to know that I shined my shoes this morning. Actually, last night, Fran. I put on a big smile. Paul would always beat me to the smile, but I put on a big smile. I just couldn't do the Toscanelli. You know, it's real close to the smudge pot. So I really look forward to this today. This has been a terrific event. A few wind-up comments. There are refreshments out here for everyone around the concourse. I think Nicole told me there are 4 tables out here. There is also a video camera set out the front door here, just to the left. If you would care to leave a funny story or even a heartfelt story about Paul, that's the place to do it. It goes to the family, so you can be on video, straighten your tie or whatever. And that is available. And last, we all thought that it might make sense to end this today the way Paul would like to end it, and that would be with the Beaver Fight song. So can you get on your feet, and we'll do this. And I'll wait for the music. Have a nice afternoon, everyone. Thank you.